Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Namaste. Hello, dear friends. Today we are going to talk about a very important topic, very much essential in the news right now, bringing on Armageddon, a chance to understand a bit about Christian Zionism and the outsized role that it plays in our world today and in what's going on. So, to begin with, about time. We need to talk about time to get the whole thing in perspective. As we've said in other talks, there are basically two ways of seeing time: linear time and cyclical time. In the Eastern world, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Jainism, we have cyclical time. If universes are created and destroyed, it is only to be created and destroyed again with the in-breath of Vishnu and the out-breath of Vishnu. Everything just continues cycling along. Time is cyclical. It is not like a movie that starts with the movie title and ends with the end. It's simply a wheel that continues to turn. However, as those of us that are Westerners have been brought up in the concept of linear time, we see linear time in Christianity, in Judaism, and in Islam. So linear time has a beginning when God says, "Let there be light." God makes a beginning of the world and an end. So time moves in a straight line from the beginning to the end, quite different than Buddhism, in which the teachers like to say, from the beginningless beginning to the endless end. There's a beginning here, and there's an end. And the time between the beginning and the end is marked by the saving acts of God, by experiences like the crossing of the Red Sea, or the crucifixion of Christ and resurrection, or the receiving of the Quran. The saving acts of God punctuate this linear journey. And because there's an end, that means in Greek there's an eschaton. So there's a whole branch of theology that is eschatology, which is the study of the end of all things. Now, in mainstream Christianity, the eschatology is quite straightforward. It says in the Nicene Creed that Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead. That's it. He was crucified, he was died, he was buried, he rose from the dead, and he will come again to judge the living and the dead. It's straightforward. Furthermore, the dead are going to be raised, and the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised, etc. The dead are going to rise from their graves at the sound of the last trump, and there'll be a judgment day, and God will judge the living and the dead. Very similar, you're also going to see in Islam that there's going to be a judgment day and the dead are going to rise from their graves, which is part of why it's extremely important not to dismember corpses or shred them or do anything to the corpses that are going to be literally, physically raised from the dead. We have to have this basic understanding of time and of eschatology. And if we look at this story of time, we can also see how the Bible goes that way. When I got my very own Bible, after confirmation, I think is when you get your own Bible, it's a book, and I was a bookworm. And what you do with books is read them. And you don't get enough time in the day to read, so you read, of course, with a torch, or flashlight it's called in American English, under the covers after lights out. That's how you read. So I read from Genesis chapter 1 till the final chapter of Revelations, right through, straight through, at night, under the covers, with a torch, because after all it's a book, so it's supposed to be read. You're supposed to read books. And Genesis is the story of how it all begins, and Revelation could be seen as a story of how it all ends, and we come to a new heavens and a new earth, and there's no more sea. So that is pretty straightforward, and you're going to see some kind of eschatology in all of the Abrahamic religions and in every tradition that believes in linear time. What about Christian Zionism? Do they have the same idea about the end of time, the eschaton, that other Christians have? Really not. So Christian Zionism fundamentally comes out of what's known as dispensationalism. And that was popularized by John Nelson Darby. And it only dates back as far as the 19th century, as compared to the Nicene Creed, which was just a big celebration of the Nicene Creed. It's something of great antiquity. In Christian Zionism, we must support the modern state of Israel. That is a theological imperative. And in Christian Zionism, in this dispensationalism, there isn't just the one and only second coming of Christ that we hear in the Nicene Creed. First of all, Christ is going to come in secret, and there's going to be a rapture, which means that all the real believing born-again dispensationalist Christians are going to be taken up to live happily ever after in heaven. As I mentioned in my last podcast, planes are going to fall out of the sky because the pilot was a believing born-again Christian. Patients are going to be left opened up mid-surgery because the surgeon was taken up in the rapture, and so on. Children are going to be left without their parents if the child has not confessed Jesus Christ as his or her Lord and Savior. And I totally have had patients whose main trauma in their childhood was being terrified that their parents would be raptured and they would be left behind. And they would be left behind to endure all the horrible things that are going to happen once the Christians are raptured. And a lot of this thinking is described in a thriller series, Left Behind, which started coming out in 1995, and there was just one volume after another, and I was given the first 2 or 3 of them from a young friend who'd been staying at the ashram until she got into dispensationalism and went off with a dispensationalist teacher. left the ashram for dispensationalism. So I tried to read these books. I have to say, as someone that's into reading and English lit, I considered the books to be extremely poorly written, but they definitely became bestsellers. I've heard that they became New York Times listed bestsellers by dint of cases of them being bought and stored away in attics until they were pushed to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. But don't quote me on that, because that's just what I recall, and I don't have any evidence to back me up on that one. But it tells the story of the life of people who are left behind after the rapture. So after the rapture comes the tribulation, and after the rapture comes Armageddon. So Armageddon is not the battle of Armageddon doesn't really feature in the Bible. There is a reference in Revelations chapter 16, verse 16, to the nations gathering together at Armageddon, which is Arm, the hill, Megiddo. It's the plain of Megiddo, and was a very strategic site on which down the ages many battles were fought. But there's no reference in Revelation to Armageddon being a battle or a war at all, just a place where people will come together in between the 6th and the 7th bowl of tribulation. So premillennialism, this is called premillennialism because there's ultimately going to be a millennium similar to Messianic Jewish beliefs. Christ is going to rule over a happy world where everyone is either dead or has converted to being a born-again Christian. More of that anon when we think about how Jews are seen by Christian Zionists. Everyone is going to live happily as they are converted, and Christ comes back again, a second coming after the rapture, and we're all going to live happily ever after if we make it till then, and if we manage to get converted to being a born-again dispensationalist Christian. Christian Zionists are actually referred to as the Armageddon lobby, and they're a very important voting bloc in US politics. And CUFI, Christians United for Israel, we were some months ago, we were involved in supporting different Christian groups who support Palestine and groups from other religions, Jewish Voices for Peace and Hindus and other Buddhists. I think we found out about it from the Buddhist Peace organization. They all went to make some kind of protest against Christians United for Palestine. Sorry, for Israel. Do excuse me. Christians United for Israel, CUFI, which is an extremely important bloc and is being very influential in US politics, and is undoubtedly part of the reason why, whether we have a Republican senator or a Democratic senator, a Republican congressman or a Democratic congressman, a Republican or a Democratic administration, they're always going to have this ironclad support for Israel. So dispensationalism is extremely important part of this unquestioning support for Israel that the United States of America tends to voice. Are they really, truly supportive of Jews and Israel? Yes and no. The alliance between Zionists, Jewish Zionists, and Christian Zionists is one of the utmost cynicism. Because Jewish Zionists are using Christians United for Israel and the Christian Zionist movement to support their Zionist project, and Christian Zionists are using the lives and the blood of the young Israelis who have to fight in the IDF to support their eschatology, their project. But Christian Zionism is in fact one of the most anti-Semitic movements you could imagine. They see Israel as synonymous with the Jewish people, which it isn't. And in fact, that is part of the definition of anti-Semitism, is to equate a political entity, the State of Israel, with Jewish people. They believe there's one internationally connected, powerful population of Jews. So that kind of sounds a lot like the Protocols of Zion, right? Like Jews are behind all the stuff that's going on, and they see today's Israel as the embodiment of a biblical nation. And they expect and want all Jews to move there, which is just part of from the Balfour Declarations on. Balfour wanted a homeland for the Jews a long way away because people like my great-grandparents and my grandparents were not wanted in Britain, where they were so different in their dress, in their language, in their way of speaking, in their expression from proper English people. It was much better to get them all to go somewhere else. There was even Nazism in many ways supported there being a state of Israel as somewhere to get rid of the Jews to. Would have been easier than killing them all, which took a massive amount of work. So these anti-Semitic notions that we see in the Protocols of Zion are also how the Jews are seen by Christian Zionists. And what is going to happen to Jews and Israelis in the eschatology of dispensationalism? They are not going to get taken up in the rapture because they are not Christian. They are going to have to deal with the tribulations, the Antichrist. The temple needs to be rebuilt so that it can become the abomination of desolation. And in the end, when Jesus comes, does his second coming, then the Jews will either be killed or convert and not be Jews anymore. So you can see any alliance between the state of Israel and Christian Zionists, and there's a huge alliance, is one of mutual cynicism. The Israeli authorities do not hold any belief in the second coming of Christ or the abomination of desolation or Armageddon or any of it. They're just using these people for their money and their influence. And the Christian Zionists don't care about Jewish people. They're using them so that they can get raptured and their eschatology can be fulfilled. Yet the Zionist project, which is seen as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Let's look at a very nice article that was written in Baptist News Global by David Baumgartner. Just came out. He talks about his childhood fears of being left behind by the rapture and how he broke away from dispensationalism to becoming a normal evangelical. He talks about how this idea of a secret second coming and a second coming is heretical because it contradicts, he says, 2,000 years of Christian orthodoxy and the language of the Nicene Creed. It meets the definition, he says, of heresy. Sensational, blood-soaked eschatology is not part of actual, real Christianity. Then there's the whole problem with the red heifer. The red heifer is needed so that it can be slaughtered and turned to ashes, and the ashes of the red heifer can be used for purification so that the temple can be rebuilt on the Temple Mount where we currently have the Dome of the Rock, on the rock where Abraham stood. The last thing we need is to stir up the kind of level of global trouble that would be caused by destroying Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock and building a temple there. I like how David Baumgartner says, what my patients have also told me, I am a survivor of this theology. I know the paralyzing fear it produces in children. I have experienced this in my patients. And the arrogant certainty it produces in deluded, self-proclaimed theologians, prophets, and pastors who know more about headlines than they do historic Christianity. So, really could bring about the end of the world if this kind of illegal and extremely stupid policies are carried out, like rebuilding the temple, which also goes against Jewish mystical teachings, because we had temple-based Judaism until the temple was destroyed in AD 70, and then we created instead rabbinic Judaism, and the Jewish home became as sacred as the temple used to be. And we are supposed to be going on to the time when true worshippers worship in spirit and truth, the age of Atzilut, the age of spirit and truth. We're not supposed to be putting the clock back 2,000 years or more to sacrificing animals in a temple. I'm sorry, I don't want to laugh, but I find it like absolutely ridiculous. Why is this news? So there's two really important reasons why we need to understand this. The first is about Palestine. The extent to which Christian Zionists have no care for the Palestinian people. Actually, for many of them, want to see greater Israel, which means the end of Syria too, the end of Lebanon too. Want to see this greater Israel. Want to see the Jews totally control this country that they created by a Nakba, and have no love, no compassion, no kind of empathy or any kind of Christian feeling for the Palestinian people. Are happy to see a Bethlehem without the shepherds of Bethlehem. It makes me cry every time I think about the shepherds of Bethlehem who have shepherded their hills on their flocks on the place where the angels talk to them, have carried on shepherding their flocks there for 2,000 years. There's no care for the Palestinian people. Christian Zionists are working against any kind of a free Palestine. They do not believe in a two-state solution. They want it all to go to Israel. Remember, not for the benefit of the Jewish people, so they can get raptured. So that's the first thing we have to think about. There are 10 million members of Christians United for Israel and millions more Christian Zionists. Estimates I've seen is there are about 30 million Christian Zionists in America, which means there are twice as many Christian Zionists in America as there are Jews in the entire world. So they are a force to be reckoned with. But it's come up very important in the news just right now because US military commanders have been evoking this extremist Christian rhetoric about the end times to justify the Iran war. They have been gloating. I'm going to The Guardian because it's a respected paper, and The Guardian saw what the military religious freedom group saw the emails that were sent to this group. So basically, quoting from The Guardian, US military commanders have been invoking extremist Christian rhetoric about biblical end times to justify involvement in the Iran war to troops. They have been saying President Trump has been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran. Well, they probably said Iran, but anyway, Iran, to cause Armageddon and mark his return to earth. So Christians who were not Christian Zionists, a Muslim, a Jew, and others, perhaps atheists or agnostics, filed a complaint about this. You are not supposed to get this stuff from your officer, from someone. It's completely wrong, because we're supposed to have, in the United States of America, a separation of church and state. So we are bringing down fire, raining down fire and brimstone, raining down burning oil on the people of Tehran, killing little schoolgirls with Tomahawk missiles, bombing apartment buildings and crushing civilians, and we are doing all this to bring on Armageddon, to fulfill biblical prophecy, a heretical view of biblical prophecy. I'd like to cycle this around and come back to the real Bible and a truthful and positive view. So I'd like to come to the prophet Isaiah. There was a time in history, just been studying this time in history with the students, there's a time in history known as the Axial Age. It's the time when the Upanishads were written. Many of us believe the greatest insights into the nature of reality that were ever penned. It was the time of the Buddha, of Bhagavad Gita, and the time also of the Hebrew prophets. It's a time when we realized it's time to go beyond sacrificing animals in temples, because that's not what God really wants. What God really wants is for us to walk humbly, to live justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And I love this passage, in the second chapter of Isaiah, because I saw it once in a vision. I had a vision in which Jerusalem, Zion, was lifted up bigger than on a taller mountain than when I saw it, a kind of a tour. And people of every race, from every direction, were climbing up to that city of light. All the peoples, in their own way, in their own path, coming to the light. Interestingly, I made a painting of this vision, and I showed it to people. I showed it to an Indian nurse and said, "What do you see?" And she said, "All the people's coming to the light." I showed it to an English person. I was in England at the time, and he said, "You need to go to Glastonbury Tor." And I did. I did go to Glastonbury Tor. It is a place like that. But here's what Isaiah says. "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations. He shall decide for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." Ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more. The swords are going to be beaten into plowshares. This is the real meaning of Zion, the lifting up of a city of light that welcomes all peoples, all nations, from all directions, to come into a world of peace, a world of harmony, a world like that was envisioned at the founding of the United Nations, a world in which there will be no more training for war, and we will no longer need weapons, for we will all live together in peace. This is the real vision of the city of peace. This is what Zion is supposed to be, not a political entity. The land that was promised to be given to Abraham was given, not taken, not won by force of arms. We are called to live together in peace as we have envisioned in the Charter of the United Nations. And a horrible thing about this Left Behind series is that the Antichrist, Nicolae Carpathia, is Secretary General of the United Nations. You see where this is leading, right? The real United Nations, having a vision of settling all our disputes by diplomacy, of never waging a war of choice. And here we are, the United States and Israel, engaging in a war of choice against Iran. To me, it's not about what you feel about the Iranian repressive, theocratic regime. It's about international law. It's an illegal war. it shouldn't be being waged. We cannot justify it from Scripture, from the same Bible that has told us that we wait for a time. We must work together to bring the time when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and there shall be no more training for war. This is the future that we all need to go to, not the eschaton envisioned by the Christian Zionist dispensationalist heresy.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivadanam urvarukamiva pandanam mrityormukshi